one. Clicky. All right. Jarring break in the music. Out of the warm and sunny upper Midwest, welcome to Lorem Ipsum Live. We are Squidicide and Logus, and today is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. And I think we've probably got a hell of an interesting show that's probably going to be the first in a series on this topic. But first, let's do our traditional summary of how we've been for about the last week.
Good.
Mine.
How you been doing?
I've been doing all right. There hasn't been a lot of particular interest happening that's new or unusual. Did manage to get me and some friends out to the shooting range on Saturday to have some fun with cap and ball, black powder revolvers. Excuse me, shit. And my flintlock rifle. I got to, reteach and then teach some people, and there were some randoms at the range that just kind of gathered around to watch what was happening because everybody is out there with their modern sporting guns, their AR-15s. One lady with a subcompact 9mm Glock trying to take shots at 100 yards.
What, like by throwing it?
No, just
Does she just put it in a mount and
no. But we had an audience and a couple people wanted to learn what was up, so I got to have fun teaching that shit because it's what I like to do. And confirmed that the sights on Colt pattern black powder revolvers, if they're historically accurate, are set long as hell. I was consistently making, center torso hits, point of aim, point of impact at 100 yards, cap and ball revolver. I know the bullet drops a lot, so that has to be where the sights are set.
Yeah.
Which explains an awful lot about why they were hitting awfully high at 25. I was pretty excited about that. And I finally was getting accurate hits with the flintlock rifle at 100. I tried that before, and I couldn't hit a target.
Well, didn't we used to shoot British style, where you're aiming at the belt buckle?
We did, but mine's a reproduction gun. It's not even really a repro. It's a Thompson Center made this gun in the 70s, and it's got a dovetail brass blade front sight. It's got buckhorn rears. God only knows what distance it was zeroed for. And when I was originally doing the shooting, trying to figure out where it was hitting, I was doing load development. And you start at 50 grains, 1 grain per caliber, right? And I think that might be for 2F, but I'm using 3F. Should have some more oomph. And I could hit a target at 25, but I couldn't print anything on a 1-foot target at 50, and I really wasn't hitting anything at 100. Had a little bit more luck when I bumped it up to 75. I could hit a target at 50, but not consistently or accurately.
Mm-hmm.
So this past weekend, I bumped it all the way up to 90 grains of 3F, which, if I've done the math right, should be about the maximum load for this gun. But now I'm hitting point of aim, point of impact, pulling headshots, standing offhand at 100 with a flintlock.
Pretty good.
It was remarkably good. One of the people that wanted to learn how to shoot it and wanted to see, handle it and take a shot. He was a lefty, and he grabbed the gun left-handed. I was like, you don't want to do that. This is a right-handed flintlock. That's going to go boom right, right there in your face.
Yeah. I mean, people who use bullpups think that being left-handed is a curse.
Yeah.
Flintlocks are a whole different animal.
Well, I mean, even standing next to a guy shooting a flintlock's a pain. I've accidentally done that when teaching somebody how to shoot flintlock. I've forgotten that there's a vent in the chamber right there and stood too close on their right, and you get sprayed with hot bullshit, and it's not fun. But yeah, no, that was a good time. I came home, Sewed some buttons. I got a whole new getup for late 18th century mountain man stuff. I really considered wearing that bullshit for tonight's show, but I felt like it would not accurately represent my views.
Well, I mean, you're pro mountain man.
I am pro mountain man, but you know,
I've seen your Tinder. It's a joke.
yeah, I know. It took me a second. I was like, wait, I don't have any mountain man pictures on my Tinder. Wait, oh yeah. Eh. But yeah, no. How's your week?
Well, actually, my week very recently is why we had to delay things. I was the town over getting my vaccine at the VA.
Hell yeah.
Um, so far, nothing really major. It's fine. Um, downside is that I didn't eat beforehand in case I did get nauseous, which is something. Nausea is like a thing that just sort of happens to me. But so I'm going to be sneaking in the rest of this quesadilla into my face over the course of this conversation. And I'm going to try to do it in a way that it doesn't disrupt the flow. I don't predict 100% success on that. However, beyond that, I got a cast iron tortilla press.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that.
I got that today. Got a tortilla press. We're getting a new water boiler because one I have was used twice over by the time I got it like 10 years ago. And I'm looking at this thing going, wow, this is an ever-growing fire hazard in my kitchen that we use literally every day. So we're replacing that. That hasn't really come yet, but it's coming tomorrow or Friday at the latest.
Have you considered that you could replace that one-use utensil appliance with a kettle you put on the stove?
I have those, but they're slower. They take more energy. And a water boiler isn't exactly one use because you use boiled water for like 1,000 things.
Well, that's fair.
Like I live in an apartment with a really bad water heater, so like if I want to take a bath, which I'm doing now for hygiene boost while I heal, I need to boil some water. If I want to make some ramen and I want to take forever, I boil some water. If I want to make coffee or tea every day, I boil some water. If I have some unwanted guests, I boil some water. So yeah, it's a really useful thing. And also, you can like take it camping and like a battery, and you're good to go. You have hot water in emergencies or whatever.
That's true.
And we're getting the we're getting the 1 gallon size. Our current one's a liter. So like if we've got like more, you remember when you were over here, like if you like more than like 1.5, maybe 2 people wanted like a cup of coffee, it wasn't fucking happening. You had to like wait and take turns.
Yeah.
Well, now we got a gallon. We're gonna the one we're replacing with is a gallon. So, like all the coffee and tea you can want. Got some new pepper and salt. Got some new pepper grinders, some spice grinder. We're replacing a lot of junk in our kitchen with stuff that's better quality but smaller or more durable.
Yeah.
That's really what that boils down to.
Hasn't been used a shit ton in all of your cooking over the last several years.
Yeah, no, our stuff was all worn out, and we got from like Goodwill and stuff because, we had no money. And it's like, well, we're gonna be moving soon, and if we can get rid of all the stuff we don't want, we just get rid of it and replace it with replace like 3 things with 1 thing. So, and with spices, we use a lot of spices for our cooking because we do a lot of Asian and Mexican and Italian. So a lot of Asian. So a lot of fresh spices. So spice grinder was a thing. But besides getting stuff, cleaning, hanging out with friends on the interweb. We went magnet fishing.
Yeah.
Caught a tailpipe. That's really it. I mean, my week has been pretty okay since last week.
That's pretty good. I'm happy to hear that.
I had some other news of some kind that was important, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it is.
Must not have been that important.
It probably isn't. It might be that I'm missing a leg now, and I would just my memory works that way.
Unfortunate. You're not missing a leg, are you?
No.
Okay, good. So yeah, I'm not even gonna ask if we want to try to do like news that's other than what we're talking about, because I suspect that any like recent news we'd want to talk about is gonna lead directly into what our topic is this week anyway.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Which is you know what? Fuck it. We're gonna talk about gun control because that shit's becoming relevant quickly.
Yeah, it's been relevant for a while now, but it's after the last like 2 weeks, it's almost kind of like if we want to be responsible and topical, we kind of have to start in on this topic because it's going to become increasingly important over the next month or so,
Yeah, and
at least.
it hadn't been like terribly topical during the whole after the coup and during the inauguration, back during the election and shit. There was other more important shit to talk about in recent events, but the last 2 weeks we've had two relatively major mass shooting events in the United States and two pieces of gun control legislation, one of which has passed the House and is on its way to the Senate, one of which is moving through committees in the House, and most people feel like it's not likely to make it anywhere in anything resembling its current form if it does at all. But yeah, that definitely it felt like the time. I know you had some very specific ideas with how you wanted to start this conversation, so I will yield
Well,
the floor.
I think because firearms, gun control, this is a very in this country, it's an extraordinarily hot topic. And one of the reasons why it's so spicy of a topic is that gun control has different meanings to different people. And depending on how they interpret the phrase gun control, that will immediately start shaping their reaction to the conversation. And it's like I've said before, to me, conversations are the most important part of what we do as our species, because you never know what's going to happen when you have one, what you're going to come up with, what you're going to think of. And when it comes to gun control, so I think starting off by us going over and kind of agreeing on like a definition of gun control or like an approach to gun control or what we mean by it, and then I think as we talked about that before we even get into a lot of specifics, something like like our ideas on what is what we would like to see or what we think people will see, or critiquing what exists in various places or whatever, or even especially before we start talking about the specifics of any individual event that brings about that conversation into to the forefront. Uh, we talked about making sure that we have a functional definition that we're using in this conversation and with the people we interact with from our audience or wherever. Because much like the term gun control itself, for example, the term high capacity magazine.
Digging right into it, eh?
All right. If you don't have an agreement of how we're using that term, there are going to be people that just dismiss the entire conversation out of hand before you even get anywhere. So,
sorry.
Just to conclude, so that's I think we should start off with what we make gun control, and then start going over some of these more important terms that are used in the function of creating or discussing gun control on a political level.
Okay. Well, I mean, as much as I will openly admit that I dislike the way in which high capacity magazine as a term is used in most political speech, subtle. All right, cool. I'll talk to the face hugger. Yeah, I take exception to the way we use high capacity magazine, what we accuse of being a high capacity magazine, but I think we're at a point in this conversation that if I want to allow it to be productive, I need to accept that high capacity in the United States is, at least in some places, legally defined as any magazine for any weapon containing or capable of containing more than 10 rounds at a time. And regardless of how I feel about the nomenclature, it's counterproductive to make that the line in the sand that I draw. Um, for those of you who may be watching or listening in the future, when it comes to the term high capacity, the reason I take exception is because, for example, and we'll have to define some of these other terms, I guess, for some people probably. A semi-automatic handgun, Glock 17, right, holds a lot of ammo. It's like 18, 19 rounds, 17 rounds, something. I don't remember off the top of my head. I've never owned a full-size Glock 17, but that is and has always been the magazine capacity of that weapon. Now, during the Clinton years, you could get a 10-round magazine for it because that was what we were legally allowed to have. And in my brain, that is a reduced capacity magazine, and the 17 rounds is a standard capacity magazine. AR-15s have been shipped, semi-automatic AR-15s, civilian legal AR-15s have been shipped on the market since the 1980s with 30-round NATO-style Stanag magazines. You can get 20-round magazines, 10-round magazines of 5s. 20s used to be the standard during Vietnam when the M16 was around, the first one. But I consider, a 5-round magazine to be reduced capacity, and a 30-round magazine to be the standard because that's what it's shipped with. But I'm going to concede this point because it is, as much as I don't like it, it's not. We could spend this entire episode arguing back and forth about it, and never come to an agreement. I'm not going to be happy with the terminology, but I also can't think of a better way to refer to it because it's really kind of cumbersome to have to say magazines greater than 10 rounds every damn time.
Just for the sake of other people who haven't had the same conversations we've had, I'm gonna kind of go over why I am cool with the greater than 10 meaning high capacity, and what based on everything I've read, how that's actually the thing. So, the reason why the AR-15 platform, the AK-47 platform, these types of weapons, the Glock, the reason why they're popular with militaries and law enforcement is because the standard is high capacity. I kind of think of it kind of like water hoses. For years, water had to be carried in buckets, one at a time, one at a time, one at a time, one at a time, and eventually they came up with a garden hose. And you can get a good amount of water with a garden hose. It's keeps coming. Then somebody invents the fire hose. Fire hose, legitimately, by definition, delivers a higher capacity of water than a garden hose. Now, whether or not you change the settings on the fire hose at the tap, at the spigot, the hose itself, its standard function is of a high volume. It is of a high capacity. And that's the same thing with firearms. The reason why the AR-15, that's actually the perfect example for my point, is that the AR-15 started off with, the M16 started off with 20, but the commies were using 30-round magazines with a lot of their weapons. And the Army got complaints constantly, like, why do these, dudes living in the jungle have 30-round magazines where the most powerful, richest country on the planet can only get a weapon with 20? I want 30. I want 30 now. And so they went to develop a 30-round magazine, and they came up with one. And they went with a 20-round magazine because 20 was more than 8. And 20 was what you had with the M14. And they went with the M14 with the 20-round magazine because it was more than 8.
20 was also what you had with the BAR before the M14.
Well, yeah, but the BAR wasn't a standard shoulder arm.
It's not, but it was good enough for suppressing fire and light infantry automatic.
Yeah, because at the time, the BAR its magazine was of high capacity compared to the 5-round bolt actions, or at the same time the BR was coming out, people were still fielding single shot rifles.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be, because you want to have more capacity. So my point is, even though it is standard for the M16 to have a 30-round magazine, the AR-15 to have a 30-round magazine, the standard of an AR-15 is of a technically high capacity design. And the reason why that matters is because, and okay, I'm gonna leave that. Actually, I'm gonna leave that one alone. That particular sentence alone. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that later when we actually get into more details. But the reason why high capacity is a term that we can use in this conversation in a more generalized, more legalistic sense, outside of the exact context that is used by militaries or by people who are familiar with military style weapons or military or actual military weapons, is that it is relative to 1, relative to 5, relative to 10, 20, and 30 is of a higher capacity. There's a lot there, and considering what one bullet can do, what one cartridge, what round can do, with what its intention, it fulfills its. Most weapons can fulfill their entire intention with one single round, ideally. So having 20 to 30, that is legitimately that's magnitudes at that point.
That's a bunch. The Marine Corps is starting to field 60-round drums now.
Yeah, well, because they want more capacity.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing with the Army and the developing the M4 to being more pew, much more DACA. But anyway, so that's an example. We're talking about definitions, but I think I would like to take a step back and actually kind of go back to make sure we have covered the first thing of what we mean by gun control.
Okay.
Because if you don't mind, I think I'll take a quick stab at it.
You go for it.
So, as we've talked about it in the past, gun control for this conversation and what we mean is legislation, regulation of firearms with the intention of allowing use conditionally.
Right.
A lot of people take that to mean gun control to them is restriction, prohibition, prevention. And that's not what we're talking about. That's not gun control in this context as far as we're concerned.
Ideally, it's not.
Yeah, the example like using is we don't call the 1920s the era of alcohol control.
Right.
It's the era of prohibition. So we're not doing that. We're not. I can't say nobody.
Yeah.
The conversation that's being had isn't about prohibition
between us.
Even then, like statistically speaking, there aren't enough people considering prohibition to even really have it as a serious conversation.
Blanket prohibition, no. But when we get into the silliness that is HR 127 later, recognizing it's likely to fail.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential prohibition in there. And when you look at other countries' gun laws, there's an awful lot of prohibition floating around. There's almost never blanket prohibition of ownership or use of firearms, but there's sweeping prohibition of specific kinds or styles or makes or models. In the case of Canada, they spent like 20 pages specifically enumerating makes and models of firearms that were banned.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, hey, no, this is a conversation, bro. Sorry, the last point I want to make on it is that we also talked about we don't believe in common sense gun control.
Mm-mm.
We believe in reasonable gun control.
Yeah.
Because common sense rules are dumb.
Well, common sense isn't a thing that exists. Everybody says it exists. Everybody wants to believe that common sense exists, but depending on where you were born, when you were born, who you were born to, whether or not they raised you, how well they raised you, what religion or policy beliefs you were born and raised into. Common sense
Yeah.
to you is going to look a lot different than common sense to somebody that grew up on the other side of the country. In some
Hmm.
places in our country, it'll look different just because the other he was raised across the fucking street.
Yeah.
Um, so common sense gun control is one of those buzzwords that I don't like. Um, for a lot of the same reasons I don't like High Capacity Magazine. I'll concede the point on High Capacity Magazine. It just makes sense to have a word to use, and your definition's not without merit. Um, but common sense gun control is one of those pleas to emotion that people make when they want you to believe that what they're doing is in the best interest of everyone, regardless of what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, common sense is relative to the issue. Thank you, the Music Maker 69. Also, welcome back, Johnny Gooch and Beardamus. Um, uh, he said he's Canadian, and when the politicians start saying stronger gun control, they're definitely talking prohibition. I mean, that might be true in Canada. Based on what I know of Canadian gun control, there's not a lot of other places for Canada to go. But I'm going to refrain from commenting too much on Canada because what we're talking about today is gun control in the United States as it pertains to the United States.
Mm,
Um, we,
I think it does generally. I mean, I think our intention of application would be the United States, but based on what we've talked about before,
to
um,
to clarify, sorry, I'm not saying we can't discuss gun control in other countries. I think it would be productive if we discussed gun control in other countries as, how might it be implemented in the United States? To what benefit? To what result? I'm going to
yeah,
refrain from criticizing Canadian gun law because that's not the point of this conversation. Um,
you could import Norincos in Canada,
yeah,
which is odd
a little bit,
because you can get things like a Norinco M14 that's chamber for 7.62 by 39.
but not a Springfield M14 that's chambered for 308.
Nope.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. In any case, yeah, no, gun control, reasonable gun control, efficient and effective gun control, um, is what we're talking about. Um, neither one of us is the kind of guy that's like, all right, nope, blanket prohibitions. We need to ban shit. I don't think. Uh, and neither one of us is like, gun control means, solid stance and trigger squeeze. Get out of here with
Yeah.
your FUD bullshit.
Well, that and those those are the guys that you hear on the news who shoot themselves in the foot. So I'm not going to listen to those guys either way.
Right? So which definition we want next?
Uh, okay, so there's all different kinds of terms. We kind of talked a little bit about this, where defining that there are guns that the phrase they came up with earlier was there's certain guns that they want to have allowed for the home, and other guns they don't want on the streets. And there's all kinds of terms that they try to use to differentiate these guns. So like military style, assault weapon, assault style weapon. The term machine gun does not factor into this.
It doesn't, because those are already heavily regulated.
Yeah, to be honest, I think machine guns are regulated properly. I don't think there's anything we need to do about machine guns. You and I disagree on whether or not they should become more available. I think they should become more available if we do it in a very particular fashion. Other
I'm
than that,
I'm not sure whether or not I feel they should become more available. I think they could, with some of the things we're going to be discussing later, um, become more available. But I'm not convinced. I'm not ready to say yes. We should do that.
all
Um,
right.
but so, do you want to go over various types of firearms quick? Because one of the other things that came up in our earlier conversation before we had really decided to sit down and talk about this on stream was that one asshole general that was talking gun control on the news who said fully semi-automatic. Uh, for
Yeah.
clarification, a single-shot firearm fires a single shot and then must be reloaded. A repeating firearm contains a magazine and must be cycled between shots in order to continue firing, and will stop firing if it runs out of ammunition, no matter how many times you cycle the damn thing. Bolt actions, lever actions, yes?
Sorry. Reloading, just be very specific. When you reload a firearm, you're taking ammunition from outside the gun and putting it into the gun.
Correct.
That's reloading.
That is reloading. He's going to be doing this a lot because I'm going to take for granted what some people know and don't know. And
I was an instructor for the Army for a while, so I was used to seeing on like non-combat NCOs like the look of what. Whenever I would use a term, I had to go back and define the term. So
yeah. No, you're good. So semi-automatic firearm is a repeating firearm that cycles itself. Okay? So when we talked about repeating firearms, bolt actions, lever actions, these are guns that you pull the trigger, you make a pew, and now you have to use your hands to make the gun do the thing, to extract a spent cartridge case, eject it, in most cases, and then feed from the magazine a new, cartridge, more ammo, new ammo, into the chamber, close everything up, lock everything up, so that you can fire again. A semi-automatic firearm does all of that on its own after you have pulled the trigger. It does it once every time you pull the trigger until it's out of ammunition. An automatic firearm does all of that, but bonus, it will continue doing it, cycling and firing and cycling and firing as long as you have the trigger depressed. So those definitions out of the way. You got any issues with any of those?
I have an asterisk.
What's that?
That terminology for pistols is slightly different due to historical contexts.
Why?
Well, okay, so like there were repeating pistols for like 50 years before we had what we'd call semi-automatics. But in the terminology of the time, what we call semi-automatic now was simply called automatic then.
That is true.
So for pistols, an automatic pistol really just means a pistol that is semi-automatic. And then for pistols, there aren't any. According to the designers of pistols, there are no fully automatic pistols because those are all machine pistols.
I mean, functionally identical. So.
Oh yeah, no, don't get me wrong. Yeah, a Stechkin is just a pistol with a lot of bah.
Yeah, a Glock 17C is a pistol with a lot of bah.
But technically speaking, it is by the designer's intent and nomenclature. Those are machine pistols.
Well,
ergo, if you say automatic pistol, you could just be blanket referring to.
So I have a proposal.
Yeah.
We use the definitions I provided.
Yeah.
Because they're less confusing.
Yes.
What next?
I just want to address it. I also want to address some pedants that are going to exist eventually.
Okay.
Some people know that some guns you put magazines in them, and other guns you put clips into them, and they're not the same thing. Clips don't have springs in them. Magazines do. I'm gonna address this for the people that are like, oh, you said reloaded from the magazine. Yeah, guns that you put clips in, where you put the clip in, that's the magazine.
Yeah, a clip is a device that you use to put ammo into a magazine.
Yeah, I mean it's the same even on battleships, where you put the stuff you haven't fired yet. That's the magazine. That's actually where we got the word from. It's from the Navy, from where they just piles of stuff that goes boom in a room, hopefully out of the way.
Hopefully fireproof.
Hopefully fireproof. So yeah, no, so if there's anybody who's going to be a pedant about the use of or saying that it's always loaded from the magazine, no. Technically speaking, it is always loaded from the magazine. There's tubular magazines, there's removable box magazines, there's integral magazines, but The discussion of what a clip is or is not relevant to this conversation at this point.
Yeah, no. We can have a whole conversation about antique firearm mechanics and why the clip is still relevant and in what context, but that's not today.
I would love to give a little lecture on all the different weird types of loading devices I love.
Right?
But that's not now.
Music Maker 69 has a quick question. Do y'all squeeze the trigger or pull the trigger? Say, they want to know if we say squeeze or pull. Because they were instructed to get in the habit of saying squeeze instead of pull to differentiate. Because, they train you to slow and steady squeeze. I don't give a shit. I would say that this is verbiage, and the way you say it only matters in training when you're trying to teach somebody who doesn't know how to pull a trigger or who is pulling a trigger incorrectly. You tell them to squeeze instead of pull.
Yeah.
Sometimes you say press the trigger. And it's mostly just a mechanical differentiation. Because if you're squeezing, you're squeezing. If you're pulling, you're pulling. If you're pressing, you're pressing.
Yeah.
And as long as it gets you to not fucking up your trigger pull, I don't give a shit what you call it.
Yeah. To be honest, for professional gun users who use guns professionally, for what guns were originally designed to do, they're cranking that trigger when it comes down to it. And when it comes to close contact, there are tons of very, very well trained, extremely disciplined, breathe and fire, breathe and fire, breathe and fire, breathe and fire type of dudes that are in the infantry or whatever that, doesn't matter. They could be themselves on fire, and they're going to keep proper breath control and trigger squeeze the whole time. But not everyone. The vast majority of people are like, "Oh, I'm getting shot at." Nah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only time I've ever seen people get told by an instructor to squeeze a trigger is when they were yanking that bitch, or not putting the correct directional force.
Beardamus did just say, "Fuck that, yank." No, don't do that.
Yeah, yank is how you shoot down birds when you're aiming for people or targets or whatever.
Yeah, it is a bit nitpicky, Music Maker. It's just it is a helpful distinction to make in training with inexperienced shooters.
Because it's hard to explain to people, you're taking something that is very, very small and basically moving it from one place to another in a mostly straight line, and every single micrometer of difference from where it starts to where it starts changes its trajectory downrange, and the further downrange, the bigger the difference.
Yeah.
So for close-up stuff, trigger squeeze, breath control, stance, the rifling or not, there's all kinds of things that people put onto guns to make them more precise, more accurate. But at range, at close-up ranges, none of those matter, and just they start to matter more and more and more as you go. So that's when when you're trying to get people to fire at a target 300 meters out, 400 meters, 500 meters, even the little difference of pulling the trigger incorrectly can throw you left or right. Huge.
Up or down. Yeah.
Huge. Well, because a lot of the stuff, if you have proper breath control and you're holding the weapon correctly, you're much more likely to actually pull left or right, depending on how you're actuating.
Up or down is a way bigger deal at handgun engagement distances, like 15 yards to 25. Inside of 15, you're mostly just pointing anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never used sights on targets within 30 meters.
I have, but I've done a lot of handgun shit.
So
and
you don't have time for that shit.
Well, you don't. And the Marine Corps was teaching combat shooting techniques with the ACOG 4-power scope. Use the scope at 25 meters.
If you're looking through the glass on an ACOG and you see the dude's chest,
you're gonna hit it.
You're gonna hit that. Yeah, so that's good training.
Where the fuck were we before we got on this sidebar about trigger pull? Someplace less fun. You're right. I think we just got done defining types of mechanical actions.
Yeah.
Um, and I
So we
don't.
could talk about the guns on the streets versus the guns in the home.
We could.
I think that's why we went through the types of actions real quick.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, guns in the streets versus guns in the home is a thing that's a little different. I've never considered this aspect of gun control before, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
I had imagined that if we were talking about banning or restricting the ownership of certain kinds of firearms, that the entire point was to keep them off the streets. And if it side
Yeah.
effect kept them out of people's homes, well, then that was keeping them off the fucking streets.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, like, for example, there's a politician from Vermont who's voted against certain national gun controls because where he lives in Vermont, his constituents don't have the guns on the streets problem. They have their guns are at home and they're used for not streets. So he didn't support the various gun control options because his people weren't being affected by the negative things that brought about the proposed legislation.
Well,
So that
that and making gun control laws that affect them, despite the fact that they don't have that problem, probably would not have been a terribly popular move.
yeah. So like for instance, like a traditionally stocked, sighted in any fashion, I don't give a shit. Uh, Normal ass hunting rifle repeater. I don't care if those are restricted whatsoever. Um, because yes, crimes have been committed with them, but like the last one that was of a high count was why we have SWAT now.
Waco? No, Waco. The Texas Tower.
Yeah. So, and that was a while ago, and we learned from that one.
Yeah.
So like, in terms of on the streets action, those particular tools are a lot less of a problem. Also, they're big and they are really easy to see. So I don't really care much about restricting those. But when it comes to other things, that's when I start talking more in depth. And the problem is firearms are not like they're not like what's a good example of something that's not like it's not like species of animals the way you think about them as a kid, where this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a horse, this is a cow. Firearms are more like dogs, where there are definitely German shepherds, there are definitely M14s, but because of how long guns have been a thing, there's definitely things in between an M14 and a hunting rifle.
Okay.
And where's the line? Where, that's where gun control gets a little iffy. So that's why rather than trying to say like military style weapon, assault style weapon, or assault weapon, I think I just put all of that into stuff they're trying to keep off the streets, and then everything else is stuff that people are trying to keep in the house. Because that's the real obstacle, is trying to. There are legitimate, necessary, not even outside of that third rail that is self-defense, because that's the third rail of gun control, self-defense.
Yeah.
Outside of that third rail, you've got sporting hunting, and then you've got all this other stuff that weapons, these other weapons that are street problems or whatever, that are neither clearly one or the other, but are, and that's where the debate happens, right?
Yeah. The AR-15 is a good example.
Yeah, because I mean, the AR-15 is an amazing AR-15 platform. It does make is legitimately, probably dollar for dollar and ounce for ounce, the most practical firearm for most uses that you would have as a person who lives in the country,
Right.
or like in the United States. I mean, not just like out in the boons.
Competitive shooting, hunting,
Self-defense,
recreational. I wouldn't use an AR-15 for self-defense, but I mean, I would if that's what I had. But I'm not seeking an AR-15 for self-defense. What the
Yeah.
fuck kind of situation am I going to get in where I have to defend? Well,
Whose dog did you kill?
whose dog did I kill?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I could defend myself from bears, mountain lions. We got that shit in the western end of the state, but that's hunting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a military weapon, assault style weapon. That kind of bullshit like gets on my nerves a bunch. Military style weapon less so, and that's a new one that kind of happened with HR 127 that now has a proposed legal definition, right?
Mhm.
I disagree with some of the stuff in that legal definition that I'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
But the old moniker of assault weapon really kind of grinds my gears because an AR-15, the kind of thing I can go to Shields and buy if they happen to have one in stock right now, and I happen to have the money, is not an assault weapon. It's a semi-automatic rifle with some ergonomic features that are identical to an assault weapon, the M4, the M16, the infantry automatic rifle, the M27. These are all AR platform assault weapons. The distinction in my brain, and the distinction I think history has made up until recently, is that an assault rifle, an assault weapon, needs to be select fire. And by that I mean you have to have the option to switch between semi-automatic function and greater than semi-automatic function, burst or automatic fire. The vast majority of AR-15s on the civilian market and owned by civilians in the United States are not assault weapons. AK pattern rifles owned by civilians in the United States, by and large, are not assault rifles. My SIG P320 is not a fucking assault weapon, despite the fact that it would fall under the military style weapons definition in HR 127 because it's capable of accepting a magazine greater than 10 rounds. Like all of a sudden, pistols with greater than 10 round potential capacity is a military style weapon. Fuck, I can make a magazine for 1911 that'll take 40 rounds. All of a sudden, 1911s are assault weapons or military style weapons. Bothers me.
For 1911.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried doing like 25. That did not work.
I mean, so the law doesn't specify that it has to work.
I know. I'm just.
It just has to contain.
I could tape a box of ammunition to the side of my gun.
That doesn't make it a magazine.
It's gonna be as effective as a 40-round magazine in a life. You get 5 rounds out, then all of a sudden your base plate just shoots into the next county. And you start dropping rounds like you empty, just shaking the box like you're trying to add some spice.
My point on that one stands, but yeah, no, assault weapons is a definition I dislike. I like yours better. Guns were trying.
I do have a point. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I finish.
All right. I recognize that there's a reason why we don't want AR-15s just hanging out in the general populace, capable to some dude can just go grab it and shoot a bunch of dudes. I don't know how you get there from where we're at right now in a way that doesn't cause a lot of people a lot of problems, because the AR-15 is the single most popular firearm in the United States at the moment. By the numbers, there are more AR-15s in civilian hands than there are any other single kind of firearm. What are you going to do, ban it?
Is that a question for me?
I mean, it's kind of a question. It's kind of a question for the ether, but if you'd like to field it, I'm not going to begrudge it.
Yeah. My answer would be I would do that.
I think that's a really bad idea.
I know. The most compelling argument against it, that's one we're going to want to leave to later, because that's a huge one.
It is.
And I, I don't want to forget what I have in my head right now going from what I wanted to cover today.
Do it, do it.
Uh, so I'm not trying to change how we're going to define assault weapons, but I do want to make some historical statistical corrections on some of the points that you made. And that is that most AR-15 platform weapons that the militaries use are not fully automatic,
They are
and they are
burst.
they're classified as assault weapons.
Every AR-15 platform weapon the United States uses, with the exception of one that I'm aware of, is at least capable of 3-round burst.
Yeah, and I'm coming to that. Uh, so the the point I'm trying to make is that gun design and firearm design and firearm application on a tactical level is they're not always the same horse. We're doing actually an amazing job right now with military technology we're building now, where we're combining technology, desired specification, training, and aptitude all into one thing. Which historically speaking has not been the case for firearms. Historically speaking, armorers want the lightest, strongest, the best for free gun they can get that shoots mostly brown people, but also if you need to, some white people. And that's historically speaking, that's been what gun armories throughout the most gun producing countries in the world have wanted. They just want so much, and they want it to do all these things. It's going to be so good. Magazine cutoffs are like the way of the future. And then the person in the army who was a week ago a tailor or a drunk guy in a bar and is now sitting there wearing a uniform, holding a gun that he doesn't know anything about, and he's like, "What's all this extra shit do? I don't know what this is for. I don't want to fucking use it. This thing here, that gets in the way. I'm gonna take that off. Oh, I got in trouble for that. I don't give a fuck." So like, and that's the majority of firearm users throughout history. So like, when it comes to assault weapons in particular, turning back to my actual point here, most people using AR-15 platforms, for example, they use it in semi or in safe
Okay.
for almost its entire use.
Yeah.
Fully automatic was originally removed from the weapon system when they realized that a largely conscript military was burning through ammo because people would simply point the weapon downrange and go bah, and then reload, and they go bah and reload and shoot nowhere near the target. So reducing the 3-round burst gives you still an improved hit probability on target at range or a medium and longer range, but also prevents the user from just going bah, 20 rounds gone.
Yeah.
And so that was why where the A2 platform came in as the major replacement. And the A2's junk. I hate it. It's great for marksmanship, but I hate it because it's heavy. And anyways,
Lighter
that's not the
than the
point.
A4 I carried in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and that's before you add that's before you add the other guns worth of stuff to it.
Yeah.
But so the main use of an assault weapon is to make an assault more viable. So I need to get me and my crew from over here to fuck over there. There's a problem. Somewhere between over there and here, there's you guys who don't like us guys. And you're going to try to use your guns to stop us from doing our thing. So we need to use our guns to get there. So we need to lay down an effective base of fire with secondary, priority being to cause wounds and deaths. That's secondary. If you fucking run or don't fucking move, as long as you're not shooting, that's priority number one. Now I can move my crew into your house or wherever we're going.
Right.
We are assaulting with it.
So
in doctrine, since the invention of even like the Sturmgewehr, which was a select fire weapon made in World War II by the Nazis that used a specially designed cartridge. Even though it was capable of automatic fire, the majority of fires done with it during an assault were semi-automatic
Okay.
because it was able to maintain a base of fire longer. So my point being in general that when you're talking about actual firearms in hands doing assaults, the vast majority of those assaults are being done outside of the Soviet Union. Okay, that's a huge asterisk because the Soviet Union, their doctrine was fully automatic because they're crazy. But outside the Soviet Union,
In
the
Vietnam,
majority of assault
China.
fires, they use semi-automatic fire as their doctrine because they use Chinese doctrine, which was yes, we have AKs, but fuck, we don't make our own bullets that much anymore.
All
So
right.
they
So I
or
think
magazine.
I think I understand the argument you're trying to make, and that's these weapons that are in the hands of the military that we call assault rifles, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
largely designed and intended and through doctrine used in semi-automatic fire, and therefore the AR-15 fits the description.
Yes.
Your earlier argument that the whole reason these guns were invented is the whole reason they're being used is to make an assault uh, more viable, make it easier for me to move my dudes from here to here because sustained fire and all this other bullshit. I
Yep.
would say that by that argument, we could classify every firearm invented since the first pattern, long pattern land musket, the Brown Bess, would be an assault weapon. The M1 Garand would be an assault weapon. And anything that is an improvement to firearms technology, driven in our capitalist economy since the beginning of time, by innovation in the private sector trying to get military contracts. Any gun made as a direct result of those would be an assault weapon. Fucking 1866 Winchester is an assault weapon by that definition.
Well,
That's an argument others have made.
it is, and people that are more knowledgeable than me, and especially more knowledgeable with the use of that particular farm implement. Um,
My point
but
is that I take exception with the terminology. If we want to talk about banning specific features, we want to talk about banning specific makes and models or specific functionalities, I'm all right with that conversation. I take
yeah,
issue with assault rifle for a lot of the same reasons I took assault with high capacity magazine previously.
yeah.
It's a scary word, and that's how it's used, and that's why it's used. I don't think it
Uh,
adds anything to the conversation.
my point and why I think is relevant for the conversation, the grander point, is that there are three groups of people on the idea of military style weapons and assault weapons. There are people who dismiss it out of hand because you know what you're talking about. They're automatic and there's not like you where you're actually like hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth. They just no. You said assault weapon. This conversation's over. You're an idiot. And then there's other people who they don't know what an assault weapon is or what all military weapons work or how they're being used, and so they say a bunch of shit they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to this stuff. But the I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that in practical use by doctrine and by mathematical actual superiority, there was literally no difference between other than the fact that other than the fact of metallurgy, there was no practical difference between the weapon I was issued overseas and the weapon that I bought when I came home. The only difference is the one I got from home was more expensive and built better.
Oh, yeah, mine was not as expensive and built worse in this
Yeah,
instance.
I bought quality because
I
I got
couldn't
a really good deal on it.
I couldn't afford it. Um,
So that's the thing is, it's I think we can acknowledge that these weapons, the AR-15 platform and things like it, are the commercial drive isn't that they are military weapons. We can acknowledge that, and we can acknowledge that fully automatic weapons and weapons that are capable that are the same but are capable of fully automatic weapons, select fire weapons of the same kind, are inherently more dangerous. There's no arguing that point. That is clearly the truth. That given a very short period of activity, and given the circumstances that we're actually talking about when we're talking about gun control, full automatic weapons are more dangerous. Is arguing that, but I also my biting point is that we also would have to acknowledge that in standard regular usage, according to current pretty much global doctrine on firearms, there isn't a real functional difference in how the guns are built or used, other than there's another option that's never used. And burst fire. I'm gonna quickly say what I gotta say about burst fire. It sucks. There's a reason why no one uses it anymore.
Yeah.
It's still an option on guns, but it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. We no longer have gigantic conscript armies. It doesn't even serve a point for that. It's a bullshit thing. We don't need it, and it doesn't give you an advantage numerically over anything anywhere. There are very, 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 very specific parameters in which it's actually useful, and Ted took care of that like a week ago. That's done, and it's not going to be valuable again for forever again. So that's my thing on burst fire. But so that's my point, is that I think it'd be I think it's just important to recognize the fact that there is merit to there is a reason to discuss the AR-15 platform as in the context of being a military weapon, even the civilian one, because it is in all intents and purposes doing the same function.
I have significantly less issue with military weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the context of gun control, that would have to be very carefully defined.
Yeah.
But I have next to no qualms with the AR-15 is a military style weapon. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what it was built for. And now it's on the civilian market because it's also just a ridiculously effective semi-automatic rifle. It's good for a bunch of... It's, like you said, the most practical firearm ever made.
Yeah.
I still have huge issue. Besides, well, I mean, yeah, but you can't use M2
That's a joke. No, that's a joke. No. Whoever's watching, I'm not that dumb. The M2 was not that good.
I mean, it's pretty good, but its practical purposes are limited.
But it's not 2000. It's not 2020 AR-15 good.
Yeah, no. I still take issue with I take issue with assault weapon or assault rifle, less because of the distinction now, recognizing that there really isn't much of one, but because of how it's used.
Yeah.
But I'll stick to military style weapon, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't have a problem with the AR-15 action. I think the AR-15 action has a lot of valuable purpose for the civilian, the gun at home gun. But I think that there are other features, as we're going to be discussing in the future. With the AR-15, there are other features that are not necessary for its function that do make it, or that do allow it to transition from being a useful tool at home to a dangerous weapon on the street, much more so than a lot of other things.
Yeah, we can have that piece of the conversation whenever you want to. Where are we taking this conversation next?
Well, is there any other dodgy definitions that people tend to get hung up on that we are? Because we're not going to do machine gun because that's dumb.
Yeah.
Like machine guns are regulated just fine. No one. That's not an argument we're actually even having.
Machine guns are mostly regulated just fine. We could probably do some talking about bump stocks and binary triggers and other such nonsense.
Yeah.
At some point, but actual machine guns are relatively well regulated.
Yeah.
And there are some changes that I would make to how we regulate AR-15s if we're going to be having that conversation, so that it's harder to do dumb things with them. But yeah, that about covers that stuff, I think. Where do we want to start the conversation about actual gun control then?
Well, wait, before we get into that, do we have any questions that are hiding? Let me just check my checker-do.
Sneaky Fish asked us in the Discord server whether or not we'd already discussed extended magazines. Sneaky Fish, we discussed high capacity magazines. Although I guess extended magazine, large capacity magazine, high capacity, we've kind of come to a place where that's okay. I realized that you sent me a message earlier that I can't really look at because my phone is my camera. About gun control stuff. But yeah, no, we got through that, and nobody had an aneurysm.
Oh, Sneaky Fish was in the shower at the time. So, real quick, covering it. Hold on.
Okay. All right then. Yeah. This surprised the shit out of me. What am I supposed to talk about now? Yep. I don't know where we're going to start the conversation on actual gun control. Certainly, high capacity magazine regulation or prohibition is probably going to be in the conversation. We're probably going to touch on HR 8 because that's in the Senate, and that's a universal background check thing. Welcome back.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, you just kind of... I'm not going to lie, I stammered so fucking hard trying to figure out what I was supposed to say. It was fun. So yeah, where do you want to start the conversation? I'm going to step away from the camera for a few minutes. Do we want to start with current gun control legislation that is in Congress?
Sure. Do you want to start that one because you're the one who actually has read the most recent versions of it?
Yeah. So the one that's actually making headway is HR 8. And HR 8 is a universal background check bill designed to prevent issues like the one we had in Florida, where someone who wasn't supposed to legally be allowed access to firearms was able to purchase one legally through the system because the FBI took too long to complete his background check, and a deadline for that is written into the law. You go to buy a gun, and it takes the FBI more than 3 days to process your background check. It is assumed that there's nothing in your record that would prevent you from doing so. The FBI would have come up with it right away, and they just give you the gun. And then he went and killed some people with it. So the first thing that HR 8 does primarily is extend that period from 3 days to 10 days. It also requires all firearms transfers, and for the sake of definition, when we're talking about a transfer, we're talking about property moving from one person or entity to another person or entity.
Ownership of property.
Ownership of the property. Not temporary possession of the property, not we went to the shooting range, we're going hunting type of stuff. We're talking about somebody is permanently moving ownership to somebody else. Any such transfer of a firearm would have to go through a licensed firearm dealer. All of that paperwork that you do at a dealer when you buy a gun would have to be done when you were selling a gun or buying from a private party. And I'm pretty okay with all of these as concepts. My problems with this are twofold. It feels like they're taking an awful lot of steps to solve what should be a relatively simple problem to solve. 3 days is definitely not long enough to wait, but if they'd required this motherfucker to provide his social security number on the background check paperwork, it would have taken no time at all, because it would have come back with the correct identity for this individual as soon as they ran the next check. Because you're not required, by the way, for those of you who might not know, to provide your social security number on your background check paperwork. And You do have to provide a copy of your ID and some other stuff. Depending on where you live, you might have to provide proof of residence, like a bill with your address on it or some other shit, but not your social security number. You have the option to, because it speeds along the background check process if the FBI can positively identify who the fuck you are.
Well, it also prevents accidental denials.
Yeah.
Big
we touched on that in our private conversation earlier. If John Smith goes to buy a gun and he doesn't provide his background check paperwork, the FBI is probably just going to deny him the ability to buy that gun until he provides the social security number, because there's just too many John Smiths, and God knows how many of them are felons. So provide your social security number on gun paperwork, kids. It helps. If they legally required it, it would have solved this problem in Florida, given my understanding of the situation. I could be wrong. I don't have access to the police records and all that good shit, or the ATF's records, but it strikes me that would be simpler legislation to solve this specific issue they're trying to solve. On the note of universal background checks, I have no problem with them whatsoever, but this bill also very specifically states that no part of it should be taken to authorize, in whole or in part, or imply the authorization of the establishment of a national gun registry. And without national firearms registration, universal background checks are unenforceable, because any gun purchased before the enactment of the law is in the wind. You don't know what I've got unless you go digging through ATF paperwork and FFL paperwork that's supposed to be destroyed after a year. So if you don't know who's got what guns to begin with, then you've got no idea whether or not the background check was completed when this person bought the gun if they're not the original purchaser. You don't know when the transaction took place, and you can't prove it didn't take place when the current owner says it took place. I guess unenforceable is the wrong word. Difficult to enforce. And that's kind of my issue. Is you're taking a lot of you're making a lot of people who are going to abide by the law jump through an extra hoop that's not actually providing the benefit it's supposed to provide. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think actually this is a good point to address another thing about gun control. It's kind of important. Is that there's a balancing act that's being performed between two different kinds of freedom and the other responsibility of our government, which is safety. And there's like this weird triangle of so you've got self-defense, which is the safety for the user or the user agent, and then you've got freedom for use, just general freedom of property on this other end, and then the third point of the triangle is the extrapolated results of these freedoms. What kind of environment does that create for people who are not part of the user agency of the owner / people being defended by the owner or whatever. Gun control does not address criminals or criminal organizations. Those are not something you directly control through gun control. Because, as a lot of people are often willing to very, very eager to point out, that criminals don't follow the law. So all you're really doing is restricting legal ownership, which is directly true. However, and another thing we'll go into more in detail is just the hows, but that the bottom 2 points, property rights and ownership and freedom versus individual safety, freedom of self-defense and safety, those create that third point, which is where you find the criminals hiding around there, living inside there. So when you were talking about laws that uh, create obstacles, so for instance, waiting periods, background checks, licensing, insurance, these kind of things, those are direct affronts to freedom of property. And the argument for them is that they create a positive effect on environment, and that they should, if done properly, have little to no effect on a negative way for self-defense.
Yeah.
And there's so basically there's different kinds of gun control laws that are focused either over here or over here for various reasons, and the idea being that you want to try to not restrict freedom as much as you can, while at the same time creating that good environment. And I think the way you can best tell differentiate um, different people's approaches to gun control conversations is uh, how much weight does that environmental point have for them? Because like for me, that's been the driver for me changing my stance on gun control. Is that as I've gotten older, as the world has changed, and as I know more about firearms and more about firearm usage, the more I know about firearms history, technology, the more important that environment thing becomes for me. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and all consuming to the point where it starts being more important than the other two to me. But I recognize that this is a society, you need to address these points. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when discussing gun control. Is how does the thing that you're discussing play into that trifecta?
Yeah, and it's a particular issue in the United States. You mentioned
Yes.
that earlier because we have what the Supreme Court is now recognizing and has been for at least 30, 40 years, 50 years.
Yeah.
Now that we've nailed down that the Second Amendment does guarantee the individual right to keep and bear arms, which is a thing they
Okay.
avoided doing for a long time.
That's only been a thing for 13 years.
Oh, okay, it's more recent than I thought.
Yeah, 2008.
Um,
The U.S. Supreme Court first ruled on the individual right to bear arms (parentheses with certain restrictions) and in accordance with state law uh, in 2008.
okay. Either way,
Yeah.
the United States is one of not very many countries that have similar constitutional, basic foundation stones that do anything to address firearms ownership or usage. Which makes it difficult. That's really what makes the balance you're talking about difficult in the United States.
Yeah.
In other places in Europe, in Australia, in other places in the civilized world, it's much less difficult because you don't have to worry about, tiptoeing around the rights of people as recognized by your government uh, to make a law that is supposed to benefit those people.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of a unique challenge in the United States.
Yes.
Um, but the environmental factor is also over the last number of years been affecting my stance on gun control. I mean, fuck, you could testify to this. When we met, I was very nope. It says shall not be infringed. The National Firearms Act is a violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. Anything that restricts what I can own, how many, who I can sell it to, it's all an infringement. Get rid of it.
You were wearing a brown shirt sitting in front of a campfire in a very relaxing camp chair at the time.
Yeah.
I remember this conversation.
I was that was not that was a shitty opinion. That's not how you do it. My opinions and my beliefs on this have changed a lot in the last fucking decade. Jesus, it's been a long time. So yeah.
Well, I think that brings up another point: is can you do gun control in the U.S.? I mean, the Constitution's right there.
I mean,
Um,
you can, or we wouldn't still have it. The National Firearms Act has been in effect and then subsequently amended to become more restrictive since 1934,
yeah,
and then what 68, 86.
34, 38, some stuff in the 60s, Black Panthers. Yeah, and there was something in the 80s too. You're right.
86 was the one that
Oh yeah, the imports.
imports and registration of machine guns, stop selling
Yeah,
them to people if they're made after 86. They have to be transferred
yeah,
and all that special bullshit. But if none of that was constitutional, there's got to have been at least one conservative Supreme Court in the last 90 years that would have struck it down.
yeah. No, I was asking as a rhetorical kind of question to discuss, I guess, because like there's a not unreasonable belief that this is what the thing says. It says right here, shall not, I'm going to leave out the first part of that for a second. Just focus on the last part, shall not be infringed. So by what right can the government do a thing? And um, if people try comparing the Second Amendment to the First Amendment, the whole you can't shout fire in a crowded theater thing, where the Supreme Court, like forever ago, decided, hold on, you have the freedom to do a thing for you, but not a thing for other people. Your freedoms are not allowance to create harm.
Yeah.
Um, and that's per the health and public safety clauses of the empowerment of, in particular, Congress. And the execution of those laws created for the betterment of and the safety and the health of the people that Congress creates are executed by the executive branch
Right.
and protected and represented thereby. Um, but for like the Second Amendment, I kind of came up with my own. I did not hear anyone else come up with this. I never heard anyone else say this. I guarantee you somebody else at some point has come up with the same thing or even a better one. But the one I have is that according to a plain letter of the law reading of the Constitution, just the Second Amendment, ignore like the Fourth and the Fifth for a while, but just the first and the second. Um, People in prison should be allowed to own firearms because they're still Americans. Um, and I don't like that idea personally. That's the case, and most people would agree that you don't want known serial killers to be able to legally possess firearms.
Yeah.
You don't want people in prison to be able to firearms. Now, I think we should talk about felony restoration of rights at some point
Yeah.
because the way we handle felons is dumb. Ex convicts, people who have done their time and whatnot, we handle that stupidly. But um,
A lot of that has to
no,
do with the way we make felons is really stupid.
that's a whole different goddamn can of extremely rotten worms.
Yeah.
But the point I'm getting at is that I have yet to meet more than one person who believes that there, in fact, actually aren't people. That only one person has said that there are zero people he can think of that, even hypothetically, that shouldn't be armed with firearms. He believes everyone should be. Now, besides that guy, everyone else I've ever met has been like, yeah, there are some people who probably, like, if Hitler came back, no guns for Hitler. Like that should be a law. No guns for Hitler. But like, so okay. So at that point, it's a matter of how far do you take it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the kind of foundational question I was trying to get to with the whole question of can you regulate? And the answer is, oh yeah, because I mean people agree that you can. The Supreme Court says that it's part of the Constitution taken as a whole says yeah you have to.
Yeah.
And just how something's called a right it's called a right with this hand, and then this hand comes over and says, "Oh, by the way, this is what a right actually means in practice." And a lot
Yeah.
of people get really stuck up on that word "right."
Oh yeah, no, we growing up in a conservative household, the biggest hang up seems to be, especially if the government does something that can be argued to be at odds with a right. The big conservative, very religious argument is that, my rights, the Constitution doesn't give you your rights. The government recognizes these rights as granted to you by God. They can't fuck with us. God gave it to you. Like, I mean, there's an awful lot of people over an awful lot of human history that were, you know, ordained by God that did way worse shit than the U.S. government is doing right now. To a whole lot, well, maybe not more people, but to a lot of people. Um, so yeah, I mean, the open question still stands: is yes, you can regulate. That's the government's fucking job.
Yeah.
Um, how far do you take it? Is really kind of, I guess, what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, how.
It's a good thing that an hour and a half in, we finally get done with that point.
Yeah. I was anticipating this being a series of longer episodes.
Oh yeah, that's why there's a bunch of question marks over in the topic title.
Right. So I guess do we want to start with because the how far are you willing to take it? How far can you take it? Is a question that can't be answered without the how do you get there?
Yeah.
So how do we get there?
Well,
Because
okay.
we're going to differ on how far can you take it, and I think we arrive at that difference by discussing the method.
I think the most important thing would be to establish where we are first.
But right now in the
I
U.S.
Yeah, like the current situation of number of people walking around that have access to or are actually armed, and how that affects how gun control is currently standing, and how it can be amended going forward. Like if we're going to talk about that, we have to first figure out where we stand on that. And looking at my, you know, my understanding and knowledge of history, I can only think of a few examples of something kind of similar. I think the most relevant would be late medieval Germany, German states, should say, the Germanic area of Europe, Central Europe. Because that's, I think, the closest to what we have now. Because there are no other countries on the planet that have the same kind of arrangement we've got going on right now. Really,
Yeah, no.
I mean, there's some small, like I think, like Azerbaijan has very similar rules for a lot of things, but like even there, you can't own fully automatic weaponry without a license. Um, but so like you gotta find some sort of context, I think, and so like when I think of the United States right now, I think of that period of Germany where uh, the governments, the various kingdoms and states and republics, were struggling to keep people from to increase safety, because increased safety increases commerce, it decreases war, it decreases political instability. So you want peace. And the problem is that there's a long tradition, a proud tradition. My dad had a sword, and his dad had a sword. And my dad taught me how to use his sword, and no one's going to take my sword away from me. It's my right to have a sword. God gave my family this sword. Look, it's even the shape of a cross. Clearly, everyone deserves to have swords, and I should be able to take my sword from here to wherever I want, and then, if need be, defend myself with my sword. And then everyone was like murdering each other, and it was a really huge problem. And you had people doing their version of like the bump stock with the Messer, where there's a law saying you can't, non-nobility can't own swords and walk around with them. However, for self-defense, you're allowed to carry a knife. A knife is defined as a weapon where the blade and the tang are one single piece.
It's only got one
and
edge.
one edge. So you get messers, this fucking 3.5 foot long knife
Yeah,
that all of a sudden everyone's carrying.
it's a
And
it's a sword, but it's
it's
a
a
knife,
sword.
guys.
It's a really cheap sword. Um, yeah, so I mean, like, that's the kind of thing that they had to deal with. And the way they dealt with it back then is the same way I think we're going to have to go forward with ours, which is it starts with regulation, heavy regulation, saying, "Hey, we understand you have a belief and you're right." Because this is the time where people are really starting to understand what the word rights were understood starting in this period. Like this is the beginning of liberalism, and Germany, the German states, are a hotbed of that kind of conversation at the time. And these people were like, "Hey, we understand you have this idea of natural rights, but y'all can't stop killing each other. So no fucking swords, no goddamn knives. Now we're gonna have more police. They're gonna fucking just watch. No one has to kill each other. We'll have people there that mediate conversations. No longer having to like just jump to steal. You can just if you have a problem, take it to a constable. He'll talk you through it. If shit gets real hairy, the constable will raise a group of people. They'll take care of stuff.
Yeah,
But you don't need to be doing this no more." And then they added education. They started the fencing schools that were existing beforehand. There were clubs and fencing schools for nobility and aristocrats and merchant class type people. But like the fencing schools were um, influenced to actually increase the general population's understanding of violence and the tools of violence and how to responsibly go about it to the point where dueling was illegal and all sort of stuff happened, and they were able to basically re-educate the populace out of the necessity for being constantly armed. And it didn't really kick back up again until the invention of really compact firearms. um like before you start getting around like derringers and stuff, people were not nearly as armed as they are now, except for in large cities.
that's true. I mean, you have things like small, 31 caliber box lock, flintlock derringers essentially.
Yeah.
That would have been vest pocket or coat muff type.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, like a counterexample, of course, people talk about the Wild West. The Wild West was very heavily regulated for gun control. Like in the city of Tombstone and most of the rest of the county of Tombstone, you couldn't carry firearms openly. It was against the law. The ERPs said so.
we're not we're not doing the ERPs. Nope.
Just
Fuck
saying.
all of that. There's whole
That was,
videos on how they're not the heroes you think they are
yep.
and how they were shitty. But you're not wrong. Um,
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, we have there's this mythology about how there was like the Wild West, and that's where we get our gun culture from. That's not the case, because if that was the case, that we would have gotten into the 20th century with much more a much more comprehensive gun control than what we did, if that was the case.
maybe. I don't know. I can't pinpoint exactly where America's gun culture comes from. I think it's certainly been there from the beginning. Um, people want to talk about the Wild West and everybody had a gun. Yeah, okay. People, you couldn't carry them in a lot of towns. Tombstone had a firearms ordinance. Now it was easy because you could come into town with your guns, but you go to the hotel or you go to the bar, you hand them to somebody, you check your guns, and then before you leave town, you go and get them back, and then you leave. Um, but in between towns, out in the frontier, doing whatever you're doing, rustling or doing stuff with cattle, legal or illegal. Um, you know, all any number of activities in the Wild West and the Old West would have required you to have a firearm for self-defense or for survival, as for your profession, all kinds of stuff. But that's been the case in the United States since we were colonies.
Oh, before that even.
Before that, yeah, like you needed a gun to feed your face and defend yourself from attacks by literally anybody, because maybe the natives don't like you because you're white, or maybe other white people don't like you because that's a really fancy gun and they want it for themselves, or because you've got better shit than they do, or because they can,
Or because they're hungry.
or because they're hungry. Yeah. So I think the gun culture in the United States has really just been there since the beginning and has failed to adjust itself to the reality that is the relative safety of the current age.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, okay, deaths by firearm are the 10th most common cause of death in the United States. I think I looked it up earlier today. If you 1 in 300-ish chance as a person in the United States to die by gunshot. That's not including suicides. Um, versus things like heart disease, 1 in 6, cancer, 1 in 7,
Yeah.
suicide, 1 in 115. Um, so yeah, gun culture hasn't kept up. Gun control hasn't kept up with the changing reality that is the relative safety that we live in as the arguably most prosperous and most advanced country that's ever existed on the face of the planet. We're fucking an awful lot of stuff up. We could be doing an awful lot of stuff just any better than we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
And the country would be better off. And gun control, I think, is one of those things.
Yeah. I think now that we're past an hour and a half, I think we started going a bit into the new legislation, but I think we should next week really get into it.
All right. I mean, I think HR 8's been relatively well covered. Um, there really isn't a lot in there. That whole bill fits on two 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. We can dig into HR 127 because that's the big one. That's the one that's got gun people panicking.
Yeah.
That's why you can't buy ammo or guns or anything right now. They just don't exist. You can't find what you want. You can't find what you need. The market's empty. Manufacturers are struggling to ramp up and keep up to sell more stuff. Um, it's also full of a whole bunch of stuff that's never going to make it through the Senate. It's full of a whole bunch of stuff that we could debate the efficacy of because HR 127 is a good example of a whole bunch of well-intentioned but poorly thought out and eventually poorly executed, if it makes it to law, gun control that I take exception with because I think gun control needs to have an intended purpose and how it accomplishes that purpose needs to be well thought out before you do the thing. And looking at HR 127, it's pretty plain what their purpose is supposed to be, but the execution just isn't there.
Yeah.
Next week I think we probably cover HR 127 pretty well.
Okay.
Where we sit right now in the United States on gun control, I think, is from my point of view, we have a series of gun control laws, some of which make sense and are actively having an impact on gun crime and gun violence in the United States. The NFA, machine guns are heavily regulated. They're hard to get. They're expensive. If it was made after 1986, fuck off. You can't have it. Stuff like that's working, right? Can't own big ass fucking cannons, destructive devices. Short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns are a thing that you can get, but they're hard to get, and the relative lack of availability of them is probably having a measurable impact in reducing gun violence because it's a lot harder to conceal a full length AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can stuff a short barreled AR-15 under a coat and go shoot up a Walmart, that's a thing.
Yeah.
We've got other gun control laws in some parts of the country or in federally that don't make a lot of sense. I'm personally for the complete deregulation of sound suppressors because they just straight up don't do what Hollywood wants you to think they do. And I think the benefit to people who are actually engaged in firearms activities would be greater than the zero damage I foresee happening as a result of deregulating suppressors. All it does is make it harder for you to hurt your ears. Makes it harder to traumatize wildlife if you use them for hunting. Just, kill the one of them. The noise wasn't as loud. It's still fucking loud. Carrying of firearms, purchasing of firearms is a thing. We have background checks at dealers. Um, I don't know where else to go from there. We have waiting periods in some states. I don't know how you feel about those. I'm pretty okay with the idea of a waiting period to purchase a firearm on the first one. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Like in the state of Maryland, if I buy a gun, I gotta wait 10 days to take possession. If I go to buy another gun later, I have to wait 10 days to take possession. It's supposed to stop crimes of passion and shit like that. But I already have a gun. What are you
I
stopping?
think I think the permit style like that you see in a lot of European countries where you can get X number of permits all done simultaneously for the background check, and then you can use them right away, or they're good for like up to like a year. I like that a lot because, well, first off, they also have a lot more crimes that disqualify you from keeping a permit active, and if you violate certain things, you have to go in for retraining and going for classes on how to avoid breaking the law and all that stuff before they'll let you exercise your permits again. Which I like. It's not going to fly in the U.S. at all.
Yeah, no.
But uh, I also place a higher premium on society as a whole being safer, um, whether or not an individual wants it to be safer.
I mean, I'm pretty okay with the idea that you have to have training, right? A lot of one of the most common requirements in Europe to acquire those ownership licenses is you have to go through training.
Hmm.
Safety training, training on the law, what you can and can't do with it, in what situations, can you carry it, where, when, how, is that a separate permit, is there another class? A lot of places require live fire training. You have to demonstrate that you can handle the firearm and shoot it safely. And I'm okay with all that. I'm okay with requiring proof of that.
Hmm.
I don't want to see firearms ownership become more so than it already is a right that turns into a privilege you can only exercise if you have money. So, if we're going to require that training, I think it should be provided.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of the same way I'm on board with free college for people. We live in a country with this many guns. There's more guns in the United States than there are people. I think everybody at a minimum should, like, maybe in high school, have a gun safety and basic law and ethics course that they have to take as a graduation requirement, even if they don't have to shoot, because there might come a point living in the United States where you have to handle a firearm, and you need to know how to do it generally safely and legally. And there are just too many people that don't have that knowledge. But yeah, no, licenses are fine. Might be surprised that there's a couple of places in the United States that do something kind of similar. North Carolina requires a permit to purchase a handgun, and it requires a separate permit to purchase per handgun. And the only way to get around that is to have a concealed carry permit.
To be honest, I'm not exactly. One of the big changes I've undergone in the last couple of years is I'm not exact. Uh, you know what? No, I'll pocket that one and save that for later.
Okay.
Because that's a really long conversation. I don't want to start right now.
All right.
But yeah, no, I can. I think also state by state regulations have proved to be an ineffective way of doing business.
I agree.
Just because I mean, Chicago. People aren't buying guns in Chicago. People are buying guns in Indiana, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and bringing them back to Chicago. And so it doesn't matter what law Chicago or Illinois passes at that point because everyone else doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah, and without a registry, without a way to track those firearms
Yeah,
and the transactions with universal background checks, there's no stopping it.
yeah. Okay, so uh, I think now is a good place to for now,
Okay.
and we'll come back to this next week. and move to after show stuff now. Is there any new questions? I'm not seeing anything.
I haven't seen any either. You got some idea of where you'd like to start the show next week? HR 127?
I think that's where we should start. Yeah.
All right.
I'll take more time to read it again. I covered bullet points on it previously, so I was a bit not helpful on that right now.
No, you're fine. So yeah, unless anybody in the audience has a question, they can type super fast. I think we're gonna call the show here and get over to off-air open discussion. We'll hang out, answer questions, continue talking about gun stuff. Yep. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything popping up. I would encourage you guys to come and hang out and talk with us. This is a topic that's got a lot of shit going on and a lot of stuff to unpack, and we genuinely enjoy talking about it. So yeah, we'll see you over there in the discussion, and come back and see us next week, hopefully at a regularly scheduled time of 6 p.m. Central.
Yep.
Stay safe, and have
safe.
a good night.